Millionaire pretended to be disabled to test her on a blind date. What she did surprised him. Ethan Caldwell sat alone in his modern penthouse overlooking San Francisco Bay, the city's twinkling skyline reflecting in the tall glass windows behind him. He had everything a man could want. His tech startup had soared in valuation, turning him into a multi-millionaire before his 30th birthday. Lavish parties, luxurious cars, exclusive getaways, they were all his. But as he scrolled aimlessly through the profiles on yet another dating app, he felt the same hollow disconnection that had haunted him for years. The problem wasn't finding someone, it was finding someone real. Too many dates ended the same way, a glimmer of excitement when they learned who he was, followed by a gradual shift in conversation toward assets, vacations, and social circles. Ethan didn't believe in love at first sight, but he desperately wanted to believe in love beyond status. With each encounter, his cynicism grew. He started to wonder, was it even possible for someone to see him and not just the fortune wrapped around him? That's when the idea struck. He would go on a blind date, completely anonymous, no last name, no details about his company, no designer clothing, and, to push the boundary of truth even further, he would pretend to be physically disabled. Not out of mockery or disrespect, never that. Ethan had spent time volunteering in rehabilitation centers, and he understood the challenges and stigmas the disabled faced. But he also knew that this would serve as a true test of someone's intentions. If she could meet him, speak to him, and treat him as an equal without the distractions of wealth or physical perfection, maybe, just maybe, he'd finally find something real. He chose a small, cozy cafe on a quiet street in Palo Alto. Nothing trendy or ostentatious, just warm lights, wooden chairs, and the smell of roasted coffee beans. He picked a weekday afternoon when it wouldn't be crowded, ensuring privacy. Then, he created a new profile under the name E. Cole. He uploaded a photo of himself in a casual hoodie with no flashy background and described himself as recently recovering from a car accident that left him temporarily in a wheelchair. He didn't lie about his interests, books, art, long conversations, but he carefully left out anything that hinted at wealth. After days of swiping and short conversations, one profile stood out. Her name was Harper Lawson. Her bio was simple. Curious mind, big heart. I believe kindness still matters. That line caught him off guard. He messaged her. They exchanged brief notes and without much ceremony agreed to meet for coffee. Now, sitting in his wheelchair by the window of that little cafe, Ethan felt something he hadn't in a long time: nervousness. He checked the time. It was 10 minutes until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She said she'd be on time. He adjusted the blanket on his lap and rehearsed what he might say. Would she look disappointed when she saw him? Would she make excuses? To leave? Or worse, would she smile politely and treat him like a charity case? Ethan had no idea what to expect, but he was ready to find out. And then the bell above the cafe door rang. He looked up. A woman with auburn hair tied back in a messy bun stepped inside. She wore a light green dress, a denim jacket, and a warm, curious expression on her face. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on him. Without hesitation, she walked over and smiled. "Ethan?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Yes, hi Harper." She didn't flinch. She didn't glance at the wheelchair. Instead, she stepped closer, extended a hand, and said with genuine warmth, "It's really nice to meet you." As their hands touched, Ethan felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected. Hope. The cafe hummed with soft indie music and the occasional hiss of steaming milk. Ethan watched as Harper took the seat across from him without a single glance of discomfort. Her movements were smooth, unhurried, and entirely unaffected by the presence of the wheelchair between them. There was no forced cheerfulness, no strained expressions of sympathy. Just a woman arriving at a date with the kind of poise that didn't need to be performed. He had prepared for a variety of reactions: pity, awkwardness, a polite excuse to leave. But what he saw in her was something that unbalanced his script entirely: ease. She placed her small leather purse on the chair beside her, folded her hands on the table, and leaned slightly forward. "Bayou picked a great spot. It smells like actual coffee, not syrup and sugar in disguise, as she said with a slight laugh. Ethan nodded, momentarily caught off guard. Yeah, it's a quiet place. I come here sometimes to think. That's a rare thing to admit, Harper said, tilting her head slightly. People try to fill silence like it's something to be ashamed of. That you like quiet. Most he smiled faintly. Maybe I just got tired of noise. Harper didn't pry. She didn't press him about his condition, didn't make a single comment about the chair, the blanket, or the position he sat in. Instead, she talked about the cafe itself, how she loved its ivy-covered walls and the tiny chalkboard signs that changed with the barista's mood. She described the owner, a soft-spoken woman named Marcy, who had once offered her free coffee for a month, just because she brought in a box of her grandmother's old books to donate to the community shelf. Ethan found himself listening more than he expected. He wasn't scanning her words for red flags or signs of hidden motives. He wasn't waiting for her to pivot the conversation toward him, to dig into what he did for a living or how much money he made. She seemed genuinely invested in the present moment. There was a steadiness to her gaze, a calm confidence in the way she occupied space without demanding attention. It made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, this idea of his hadn't been reckless, after all. When their drinks arrived, his black coffee, her chamomile tea, Harper lifted her mug and said, "Two honest conversations and not needing to pretend we're more interesting than we are." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds pointed." She laughed. "No, not at all, just something I've noticed. Dating these days feels like theater. Everyone's auditioning for the role of perfect partner, but nobody's reading from the same script." Ethan chuckled. "You don't seem like someone who plays that game." "I used to," she admitted. "Tried to be what I thought people wanted. Smiled too much, talked too little. Agreed with things I didn't care about just to seem agreeable. But after a while you get tired of hiding all the messy parts of who you are." He nodded slowly. "I know what you mean." She sipped her tea and looked at him more carefully now, but still without judgment. "Do you?" That question hung in the air for a second longer than he expected. It wasn't accusatory, but it pierced deeper than it should have. Ethan smiled softly to mask the shift in his chest. "Yeah," he said. "I do." The conversation drifted from there to less weighted topics. Favorite books, misheard lyrics, childhood pets. Harper told a story about a turtle named Sebastian who escaped from his tank and was found weeks later under a couch covered in dust bunnies. Ethan shared that he once tried to code a robot to do his homework, only for it to short-circuit during a history presentation. They laughed easily, the kind of laughter that came from genuine amusement rather than forced politeness. And yet, despite the light-hearted tone, there was something grounded in Harper's presence. She didn't flinch when Ethan dropped his cup, slightly trying to adjust his grip. She simply reached over and steadied it with a grace that made it seem like second nature. No awkward glances, no nervous apologies. It was the kind of natural response that made Ethan pause internally. He had expected her to react differently, to hesitate, to hover too much, or to ignore it entirely. But she had navigated it with quiet dignity, and he couldn't help but admire that. As the time slipped by, Ethan realized with surprise that he didn't want the date to end. Not because he needed to maintain the ruse, but because he was genuinely enjoying himself. The armor he had worn for so long, the skepticism, the caution, the wariness, began to chip in small, imperceptible flakes. When Harper glanced at her, watch and noticed nearly 2 hours had passed. She gave a small start. "Wow, that went fast," she said. "I hope I didn't talk your ear off." "Not at all," Ethan replied quickly, dressed up in deeper clothes. "It's rare to have a conversation that doesn't feel like small talk," she smiled. "That's the nicest thing someone said to me in a while." They stood to leave, or rather, she stood, and he made the practiced motion of wheeling himself back slightly to clear the table. Harper didn't offer to push him or assist, something else he silently appreciated. She allowed him his autonomy while still remaining present. At the door, just before they parted ways, she touched his shoulder gently. "Ethan, I wasn't sure what to expect, but I'm really glad I came." "Thank you for today, me too," he said, meaning it more than she could know. She turned and walked down the sidewalk, her figure gradually shrinking against the backdrop of the city. Ethan watched her go, the weight of his deception pressing heavier now that he knew what kind of person he might be misleading. He wasn't ready to tell her the truth yet, not about his name, his wealth, or the reality behind the chair, but for the first time in years he wanted to be ready. He just didn't know how long he had before the truth caught up with him. 3 days after their first meeting, Ethan and Harper agreed to meet again, this time at a quiet restaurant tucked between a bookstore and a florist in downtown San Jose. Harper had suggested the place, mentioning that it reminded her of the cafes she used to visit with her mother during road trips. Ethan appreciated the unpretentious charm of the venue, with its warm lighting and mismatched chairs that gave it the feel of a well-loved secret. Harper arrived with the same grounded energy she'd brought to their first encounter. There was no overthinking, no anxious glances or excessive gestures. She sat across from him with a serene smile, and as soon as the menus were closed, their conversation resumed as if it had never paused. They started with childhood memories. Harper spoke of growing up in a small coastal town where the ocean was both a playground and a teacher. She described long summer days spent collecting sea glass and winters huddled around a wood stove while her mother read novels out loud. Her voice softened when she mentioned her father, who left when she was 9, and how that absence taught her to look for constancy in smaller, quieter things. Ethan, who usually offered only polished versions of his past, found himself speaking more freely than he intended. He told her about his early fascination with computers, the way he'd spent hours dissecting code instead of playing outside, and how success had come fast, but brought with it an emptiness he hadn't anticipated. Harper listened without interruption, her gaze steady and unflinching. There was a sense of symmetry between their stories, different in detail but alike in emotional undercurrent. Both had learned to be cautious. Both had walls that didn't look like walls, and both somehow were letting those barriers drop, piece by piece. Over appetizers, Harper leaned back in her chair, studying him with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said slowly, "I think people show more of who they are when they think no one's really looking." Ethan tilted his head. "What do you mean?" She toyed with the edge of her napkin. "I just mean dates like this, blind or not, can feel like performances. We come in with our scripts, our carefully curated stories, and we say the things we think will make us look interesting or kind or smart. But it's in the pauses, the little details, where the truth slips out." Her words hit harder than she probably intended. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He had rehearsed this identity, planned every detail of it. And yet, here she was, gently brushing against the very secret he was trying to protect. "Like what kind of details?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. Harper shrugged. "I don't know. How someone treats the waiter, what they say when they think you're not listening, whether they ask questions or just talk about themselves, that kind of thing." Ethan nodded slowly. "And what have you noticed about me so far?" She smiled, but it was a smile laced with subtle caution. "That you're thoughtful, that you listen more than most, that you seem to be carrying something you're not quite ready to name." For a brief moment, the room seemed quieter. The hum of other conversations faded into the background, leaving only the weight of her words between them. Ethan looked away, then back at her. "That's a little spooky, you know." "I don't mean to pry," she said quickly but gently. "Say out loud. I just think people are more than what they—" He wanted to tell her everything right then, to admit that the chair wasn't real, that his name wasn't E. Cole, and that he was testing her. But the truth had become entangled with something more complicated now. It wasn't just about gauging her sincerity anymore. It was about the connection they were building. He feared that unmasking himself would unravel the fragile trust taking root between them. So instead, he deflected. "You always see through people this easily." Harper chuckled. "Only when I want to." They moved on to lighter topics, movies that made them cry, foods they hated but pretended to like. Harper confessed that she once spent 3 months pretending to love jazz because a guy she dated played saxophone in a local band. "It was like sitting through a lecture in a language I didn't speak," she said, laughing. "But I didn't want to hurt his feelings." "Did he ever find out?" Eventually, he dumped me when I called Miles Davis that trumpet guy." She grinned, probably for the best. It was Ethan laughed, genuinely amused. Her honesty was refreshing, unvarnished. He couldn't remember the last time someone had been so comfortable being imperfect in front of him. By the time dessert arrived, a shared slice of chocolate mousse cake, Harper looked at him with a more serious expression. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "If I told you I had a complicated past, would that make you look at me differently?" Ethan frowned slightly. "Complicated how?" She hesitated. "Not criminal or anything, just heavy. Things I don't always share right away." He shook his head. "Bin, we all have shadows. What matters is who we are now, not where we've." Her eyes softened at that. "You say that, like someone who's had to start over." Ethan met her gaze and for a moment considered telling her everything. The lie, the wheelchair, the real reason he was there. But he swallowed the urge. Not yet. Instead, he said, "Maybe I have." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't feel awkward or empty, but rather full of things yet unspoken. When the check came, Harper reached for her wallet, but Ethan insisted on covering it. She relented without argument, and as they stepped out into the cool night air, she looked at him with a curious expression. "I like that you're not trying too hard," she said. "Trying too hard for what? To be something you're not." He laughed lightly, though the irony almost choked him. "Thanks. That means more than you know." They stood there. For a few seconds, neither quite ready to part ways. Finally, Harper leaned in and gave him a soft hug, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but something that felt real and warm. "Until next time," she whispered. Ethan watched her walk, away again, the sound of her boots fading into the night. He sat in his car for a long time afterward, the empty wheelchair beside him now feeling heavier than ever, not physically, but morally. He was falling for someone while hiding behind a mask she didn't deserve. And if he wasn't careful, the truth would destroy the one thing he hadn't meant to find in all this, something real. Ethan sat alone in his study later that night, the dim glow of a single desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. He had tried to work, to distract himself with code or spreadsheets, but nothing held his attention. All he could see was Harper's face, her subtle smile, the way she had looked at him, not with curiosity or confusion, but with quiet recognition. He replayed her words in his mind. "You seem to be carrying something you're not quite ready to name." They struck deeper with each echo, as though she had reached into the very lie he had built and gently pulled at its seams. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. The game he had started with so much confidence no longer felt clever. It felt dangerous. What had begun as a test, a way to filter out opportunists, had turned into something more personal, more vulnerable than he had anticipated. And now he was entangled in his own web. The lie was no longer just a disguise, it was a barrier, not to protect himself, but to keep her at a distance she didn't deserve. Harper wasn't like the others. Ethan had dated models, influencers, venture capital interns who dropped brand names like greetings. He had learned to spot the signs early, the eyes darting to his watch, the casual questions about property, the subtle flex of social media accounts. But Harper had done none of that. She had met him as he was, or at least as he had pretended to be, and accepted it without flinching. Not just accepted it, but embraced it. Her kindness wasn't performative. It was quiet, effortless, and deeply sincere, and that was what made the truth feel unbearable. For the first time, Ethan felt ashamed of what he was doing. Not because it had started as a lie, but because the lie now stood in the way of something real. If he told her the truth, he risked losing her completely. But if he said nothing, he would be building something fragile on a foundation of deceit. Every gesture she made, every word she offered in trust, only deepened his sense of guilt. And yet he couldn't bring himself to reveal the truth, not yet. He told himself he needed more time, one more meeting. One more chance to understand her better, to be sure of what he felt. But in truth, he was scared, not just of losing her, but of what that loss would reveal about himself. So he sent a message the next morning. Would love to see you again this weekend. Saturday work for you? The reply came an hour later. Saturday sounds perfect. Same cafe. He stared at the screen for a moment before typing. Actually thought we could try the botanical gardens. Less caffeine, more flowers. I like that, she replied. See you there. Saturday arrived with a cloudless sky and a breeze soft enough to feel deliberate. Ethan arrived early, parking a few blocks away and carefully assembling the appearance he had committed to. The wheelchair, the lap blanket, the slightly oversized hoodie to add a touch of fragility. He hated every second of it now, but there was no turning back. Harper appeared a few minutes later, her hair pulled into a loose braid, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She greeted him with that same unshaken warmth, crouched slightly to adjust the blanket on his knees and said, "You ready to see some outrageously named flowers?" They wandered slowly through the winding paths, passing rows of orchids, wild tulips, and hydrangeas. Harper pointed out her favorites, occasionally pausing to read the tiny plaques aloud with exaggerated pronunciation. Ethan laughed more than he expected. Her presence had that effect, pulling him out of his head, grounding him in the moment. But the deeper they walked into the garden, the heavier his chest felt. Each smile she gave, each story she told, reminded him of what he hadn't said. And then, as they sat on a bench beneath an arched trellis of wisteria, Harper turned to him and said almost casually, "You ever think about how much of ourselves we keep hidden, even from people we like?" Ethan froze. The question came like a needle to his conscience. "All the time," and he answered carefully. She nodded. "Sometimes I think I've mastered the art of showing just enough. Not too much. Just enough to seem open without feeling exposed." He looked at her closely. "Are you saying I'm doing that?" "I don't know," she replied, "of myself. Maybe, or maybe I'm just seeing something in you that reminds me." Ethan swallowed hard. "And what is that?" Harper took a moment before answering, much to risk. "Someone who wants to be seen, but isn't sure how." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but it was full. Ethan looked away, pretending to study a nearby flowerbed, but his mind was a mess of truths unspoken. He wanted to tell her that he wasn't in a wheelchair, that his name wasn't Ecole, that the person she was getting to know was both more and less than what he appeared. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he shifted slightly and said, "Thought they'd like, it doesn't work out. I've made mistakes in the past. Let people see only what I figured," Harper said softly. "You're not the first person to build walls." "I'm trying not to," he added. "I know. That's why I'm still here." They sat like that for a while longer, saying little, letting the quiet stretch between them like a bridge slowly forming. Ethan realized then that it wasn't just his lie that stood between them. It was his fear. Fear of being judged, of being rejected, not for what he had done, but for what he had pretended to be. As they made their way back toward the entrance, Harper paused near the rose garden. She picked one and held it gently between her fingers, then looked at him with a small smile. "Next time, you pick the place. Surprise me." Ethan nodded, unsure whether he deserved the chance she was offering. That night, back in his penthouse, he stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring at his reflection. The man looking back at him was whole, mobile, dressed in tailored simplicity, and burdened by a lie that had grown too large to ignore. He didn't know when he would tell her the truth, but he knew it had to be soon, because each moment he spent with Harper made the cost of silence harder to bear. And with every passing day, the risk of losing her grew, not because of who he was, but because of what he hadn't had the courage to be. The following week, Ethan invited Harper to a quiet neighborhood diner in Menlo Park, one of those spots untouched by modern trends. There were no fusion dishes or QR code menus, just vinyl booths, handwritten specials on a whiteboard, and a waitress named Carol, who had probably been working there since the 70s. Ethan chose it precisely because it was unassuming, honest and simple. 3 things he wished he could be right now. Harper arrived just after 6 o'clock in the evening, wearing a soft navy cardigan over a floral dress and a look of calm that hadn't changed since their first meeting. As she slid into the booth across from him, she offered a warm smile and a light-hearted sigh. "Rough day?" Ethan asked. "Long day," she corrected, reaching for the glass of water Carol had just placed on the table. "But it's better now," Ethan smiled. "I'm glad." They ordered without much fuss. He went with a grilled chicken sandwich, she with a bowl of tomato basil soup and a side of fries. It wasn't a fancy meal, but it suited them. There was something comforting about the familiarity of the setting, something that made the conversations feel less like performances and more like shared pages in a slow-burning story. Halfway through the meal, Harper grew quieter. Her fingers played with the edge of her napkin, twisting the fabric absent-mindedly. Ethan noticed. "You okay?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've been meaning to tell you something." His heart rate ticked upward, though he kept his expression neutral. He had spent days agonizing over his own confession, and now here she was, poised to share something of her own. "You don't have to if you're not ready," he said carefully. "No, I want to," she replied, meeting his eyes. "Because if we keep pretending we're just two people on harmless dates, we're never going to know if this could be real." Ethan nodded once, silent. Harper took a breath and began. "I have a younger brother," she said. "Nolan. He's 24 now. When he was 15, he was in a diving accident. Spinal cord trauma. He's been in a wheelchair ever since." The words came with an unexpected weight, pressing down on Ethan's chest like stones. "I was 19 at the time," Harper continued. "And our mum, well, she wasn't in the best shape emotionally. I ended up taking on a lot. Hospital visits, physical therapy schedules, learning how to transfer him safely, how to help him without making him feel helpless. It was overwhelming. But it also taught me more about patience, empathy, and resilience than anything else in my life." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. This wasn't just a small revelation, it changed everything. She wasn't just kind to him because she was a good person. She had lived this reality. She knew what it meant to be around someone with a disability, and she had never once asked him for details, never prodded, never questioned his independence. She had simply accepted what she saw and treated him with a level of respect and care that now took on an entirely new meaning. "He's doing better now," Harper added softly. "Still in the chair, but he's living on his own, college graduate, graphic design. He's even dating someone." She smiled at that, a quiet pride in her expression. "But those years, they changed me. They taught me how to love someone without pitying them, how to see the person, not the chair." Ethan struggled to find words. The guilt that had been simmering beneath the surface now threatened to boil over. Her story wasn't just emotionally significant, it cut to the heart of his entire deception. What he had designed as a filter, a clever test, now felt like a cruel trick. She had spent years lifting someone through real struggle, and here he was pretending to understand that world from a place of safety and fabrication. "Thank you for telling me," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. "I didn't want to make you uncomfortable," she replied. "I just thought, if this is going somewhere, you should know that about me, that I don't scare easy, that I know what it means to show up for someone, even when things get complicated." Ethan's throat tightened. The irony was crushing. She had opened her heart to him with a story that demanded nothing but respect, and he was sitting on a secret that would make every moment between them feel tainted if it ever came to light. "I admire you," he said finally. "A lot." Harper smiled, but it was a knowing smile. Not proud or dismissive, just deeply human. "You don't have to say anything in return," she said. "Want to pretend anymore. I didn't tell you to impress you. I just didn't." They finished their meal with less conversation, though the silence wasn't empty. Ethan felt himself drifting into reflection, spiraling inward with each thought. The more he understood Harper, the less defensible his charade became. He couldn't reconcile her openness with his deceit. Every laugh they had shared now felt like a memory marked by falsehood. Every touch of her hand, a kindness given under false pretense. When they stood to leave, Ethan rising carefully from the chair, Harper adjusting her bag, he found himself wanting to reach for her, to say something honest, something real. But the words stayed buried. Outside, the air was cool, and the sky had turned a soft shade of lavender. Harper paused beside her car and turned to face him. "I know there's more you're not telling me," she said, not accusingly, just matter of fact. "Still here. When you're ready, I'll be here." "But Ethan nodded, his mouth dry. "Soon," he whispered. She leaned forward and kissed his cheek lightly, then stepped into her car and drove away. Ethan stood there for a long time, the hum of the diner's neon sign buzzing faintly behind him. He felt like a man staring at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the only way forward was to jump, and praying that when he did, there would still be something left to catch him. The plan was simple: a nice dinner at a high-end restaurant in downtown San Francisco, with a table reserved in the corner for privacy. Ethan had chosen the venue carefully, an upscale yet discreet spot that catered more to regulars than celebrities. He was hoping the elegance of the place would offer a new environment for them, something that might shift the energy and help him build the courage to finally be honest with Harper. She arrived right on time, as always. Her dark green dress contrasted beautifully with her auburn hair, and as she approached the table, she gave Ethan a smile that instantly disarmed his nerves. They talked easily at first, discussing recent books, a strange dream Harper had the night before, and a documentary they both had accidentally watched on the same streaming platform. There was laughter, connection, and even moments when Ethan felt his deception fade beneath the surface of their chemistry. But the illusion wasn't built to last. Midway through the main course, as Ethan sipped from his wineglass and Harper reached for her napkin, a familiar voice rang out across the room. "Ethan Caldwell, is that really you?" The voice was unmistakable. Ethan looked up and his heart dropped. Standing just a few feet away, dressed in business casual and holding a drink, was Zach Larimore, his former colleague from his first startup and someone who knew very well both his name and his history. Zach took a step closer, clearly not registering the shift in Ethan's expression. "Man, it's been years. Didn't expect to see you here of all places. Wait, what?" He glanced down, eyes catching the wheelchair. "You okay?" Ethan forced a smile, raising a hand as if to calm the situation. "Might be confusing me with someone else." "Zach, hey." "Yeah." "I think you." Harper turned her gaze slowly from Ethan to Zach, then back to Ethan, her brow furrowing slightly. Zach chuckled. "Confusing you? Come on, Ethan, I worked with you for 3 years. You practically lived in those black hoodies. I'm not crazy." Ethan let out a strained laugh. "Sorry, man, I've just got one of those faces." There was a moment of awkward silence. Zach's smile faded into confusion, and he raised an eyebrow. "Right. Well, my bad then. Sorry to interrupt. Enjoy your evening." He walked off, glancing back once before disappearing behind a partition. Ethan looked across the table. Harper's expression was unreadable. He cleared his throat. "That was weird. Some people don't take no for an answer." After dessert, as they stepped outside into the cool evening, the tension hung in the air like fog. "Thanks for dinner," she said, her voice gentle but distant. "I'm sorry about earlier," Ethan said quickly. "That guy was just persistent," she finished for him, "and very sure he knew who you were." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, it happens sometimes. I guess I just have one of those faces." Harper's silence in response was louder than any accusation. She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you hiding from something or from someone?" He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "Everything yet?" "I'm not hiding. I'm just not ready to share." She studied him. "That's fair. But sooner or later, the truth comes out, one way or another." Ethan nodded, and they said goodnight with a hug that felt more like a question than an answer. When he got home, he didn't even bother turning on the lights. He rolled himself into the center of the living room and sat in silence, the night stretching around him like a sentence. Zach's voice replayed in his head, over and over, until it wasn't just an echo, it was an alarm. He had known the risk of running into someone from his world, but it had felt remote. The lie had been contained for so long that he'd begun to believe it could live indefinitely in its safe little bubble. But Harper wasn't someone to be fooled easily. She was intuitive, grounded, and had spent her life navigating between appearances and truths. The moment had shaken her, even if she hadn't said so out loud. And now Ethan was no longer worried about whether she would find out the truth. He was worried about when and how. The next morning, he received a message from Harper. "Hey, Hope, you got home safe. Would like to talk soon." There was no anger in the text, no sarcasm, but the distance was unmistakable. He stared at the message for several minutes, then replied, "Of course, name the time." She answered a few minutes later. "Friday night. My place. I'll cook." Ethan leaned back in his chair, the sunlight pouring through the windows, doing nothing to lift the weight in his chest. It was no longer a question of whether he should tell her the truth. It was a matter of whether he could afford not to. As Friday approached, he felt the pressure tighten like a vice. Every hour brought him closer to the conversation he had tried so hard to avoid. The fantasy was crumbling, the mask no longer fit, and Harper, with her calm voice and perceptive eyes, had made it clear she wasn't going to play games. Ethan wasn't just afraid of losing her. He was afraid of what her absence would reveal about the life he had constructed, how much of it was built on fear and how little of it had been lived in honesty. The air on Friday night carried a strange tension, neither stormy nor peaceful, but something taut, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Ethan parked a few blocks from Harper's apartment building and spent several minutes in the car, staring at the worn edges of the steering wheel, trying to gather thoughts that refused to settle. The lie he had carried for weeks now sat on, his shoulders like armor too heavy to move in. The memory of Zach's interruption still echoed in his ears, and Harper's voice, always soft, always steady, now felt like the thread that could unravel everything. He adjusted the lightweight wheelchair in the back seat, setting it up like he had done so many times before. Every movement felt mechanical. The act no longer carried the thrill of secrecy. It was now a quiet burden. Harper's building was a modest two-story nestled between trees that turned golden under the fading sun. He rang the buzzer, and her voice came through, clear and neutral. "Come on up." The door clicked open. Inside, her apartment was warm with the scent of basil and garlic. A soft jazz playlist played in the background, and the lighting was dim enough to soothe but not to hide. She wore a simple grey sweater and jeans, barefoot on the hardwood floor, her hair tied up loosely as she stirred a pot on the stove. "Hey," she said when he entered. No kiss, no embrace, just a glance that hovered somewhere between welcome and waiting. "Smells amazing," Ethan offered, trying to meet her tone without overreaching. "Thanks. Thought something simple would be best. Pasta, salad, wine?" He nodded. "Perfect." They moved through the motions of setting the table, pouring drinks and settling down to eat. But the space between them wasn't filled by conversation the way it used to be. Words came, but they were measured, as if both were feeling around, the edges of a boundary they couldn't yet name. Finally, after a few bites and some silence, Harper set down her fork and folded her hands in front of her. She didn't look angry. She didn't look hurt. She just looked sure. "I'm going to ask you something," she said quietly, "and I'd like you to answer honestly." Ethan stopped chewing. He swallowed, then nodded. She looked directly at him. "Are you being completely honest with me about who you are?" The room held the question like a fragile object. Ethan didn't answer right away. He stared at her, at the calm firmness in her expression, and knew the moment had come. This was the turning point, the cliff's edge he had delayed reaching, now standing right in front of him. "I'm not," he said finally, voice barely audible. "Not completely." Harper didn't flinch. "Okay," he blinked. "That's it?" "No," she said gently, "but I wanted to give you the space to say it yourself." A long silence followed. Ethan stared down at his plate, suddenly unable to eat. His chest tightened, but Harper's calm presence kept him anchored. "I didn't mean to lie," he began. "When I created the profile, I was tired of people wanting something from me. The money, the name. I wanted to know if someone could like me without any of that." "Sergeant, so you made up a version of yourself?" "Yes," he admitted. "I thought I could control it, just a little test. But then I met you and you were different. And the longer I waited to tell you the truth, the harder it became." She listened without interruption. "I didn't think I'd care this much," and he added, "everything. But I do, and now it feels like the truth might ruin." Harper picked up her wine glass, sipped once, then set it down. Her gaze was steady. "I knew from the beginning that there was something off," she said. "Not in a bad way, just something that didn't match the rest of you. The way you carried yourself, the way you reacted to things. And then Zach, well, he said your name. I panicked," Ethan admitted. "I've never lied like this before. It got out of hand." "I believe you," she said, "but I need you to understand something." He nodded, ready to receive whatever came next. "I've spent my whole life watching someone I love be misunderstood," Harper continued. "People assumed things about my brother all the time, what he could or couldn't do, what kind of life he'd have, whether he was someone to admire or pity. And I've spent years learning to see through all that, to love without filters." "I know," Ethan whispered. "That's why this feels so awful now." Harper looked down, then back at him. "What you did wasn't just a lie about money or mobility. It was a manipulation of something sacred. I treated you the way I treat people who have fought real battles, carried real scars." "I didn't mean to mock that," he said quickly. "I swear to you, Harper, I wasn't trying to diminish it. I wanted to be seen without the distortion." "I understand the intention," she replied, "but intentions don't erase consequences." Ethan nodded slowly, shame threading through his chest like cold wire. "So, and what now?" Harper took a deep breath, exhaling through her nose. "I'm not walking away, not yet, but I need time, and I need honesty. From here on out, no more layers, no more waiting for the right time. If we're going to keep seeing each other, it has to be real from this point forward." He looked at her, grateful and devastated all at once. "You deserve more than I gave you." "I know," she said softly, "but I also know people mess up. What matters is what they do after." They sat in silence again, this time more reflective than tense. Ethan reached for his wineglass and took a slow sip, processing everything. After a few minutes, Harper stood and began clearing the plates. Ethan moved to help, but she shook her head. "Let me," she said, "just for tonight." He sat back, watching her move through the kitchen. There was no resentment in her actions, but there was distance, a careful re-evaluation of the space between them. And Ethan understood. He had broken something, not shattered, not destroyed, but fractured enough that it would take time and truth to rebuild. As he wheeled himself toward the door later that evening, Harper walked him out. "I'm still here," she said, repeating her earlier words. "I know," he whispered. "Thank you." She nodded once, and then he was gone. The night air was cold against his face as he returned to his car. The wheelchair folded quietly in the back, and he sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. For the first time since this began, he felt both the weight of what he'd done and the fragile hope that something might still be salvaged. But only if he was brave enough to face the truth in full and never retreat into silence again. The following week was marked by a return to the rhythms Ethan had once embraced and now found dissonant. He stepped into the glass and steel headquarters of his tech firm, like a man returning to an abandoned version of himself. His name still held weight in the industry, Ethan Caldwell, founder, disruptor, media-dubbed genius, but the identity that came with it now felt like a suit 2 sizes too large. The office greeted him with the usual deference. Assistants, executives, project leads, all moved around him with the subtle reverence he had grown used to. But none of them knew about Harper. None of them saw the conflict beneath the surface, the ache that had settled into his bones since she'd told him she needed honesty and time. He hadn't heard from her in days. No calls, no texts, only silence. And in that silence, his own thoughts had begun to echo louder. The boardroom smelled faintly of expensive coffee and tension. Ethan took his usual place at the head of the long mahogany table and listened as his CFO launched into a series of numbers, followed by the head of strategic partnerships who outlined an unexpected proposition: an international merger with a tech conglomerate based in Zurich. The deal would require Ethan to relocate, at least temporarily. Switzerland. A new office, a new team, months overseas. The room buzzed with anticipation. The potential for expansion laid out in charts and data models. But Ethan wasn't thinking about the numbers. He was thinking about Harper. As he stared at the presentation slides, the idea of leaving the country pressed against his chest like a closing fist. Could he leave without seeing her again? Could he walk away from this fragile, unfinished chapter? Or worse, tell her the truth only to disappear halfway across the world, making it all seem like a final deception? When the meeting ended, his team waited for his input. Ethan stood slowly, his voice low but firm. "I'll consider the proposal, but I'm not making any decisions yet." Back in his office, he closed the door and sank into his chair, the city skyline stretching out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. For years he had believed that control was the key to stability. Build the company, build the brand, manage perceptions. But now, with everything crumbling beneath a lie he had told himself was harmless, he saw just how fragile control really was. He picked up his phone, fingers hovering over Harper's name in his contacts. He typed a message, deleted it, then typed another. Nothing felt right. Everything sounded like an excuse or a plea. Eventually, he put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. That night, he returned to his penthouse and found it unbearable. The view, once inspiring, now looked cold. The silence, once welcome, now throbbed with the absence of someone who had become essential. He paced the rooms, finally sitting at the kitchen counter where a week earlier he had written out the beginnings of an apology letter he never sent. It sat folded in a drawer, unfinished, untouched. The next morning, unable to stand the stillness, he drove through the city with no destination. Eventually, he found himself near Golden Gate Park. He pulled into a small parking lot and sat there, watching joggers and dog walkers pass by. People living lives that required no deception to maintain. His phone buzzed. It was a message from his assistant. "Just a reminder, Zurich board call rescheduled for next week. They'd like your input on projected timelines." He stared at the screen. Then he switched apps and searched her name. Harper Lawson. No recent messages, no social media activity, just silence. He opened their last conversation thread and typed a new message. "I need to talk to you. No lies, no delays, I have to tell you everything, I need to." He pressed send before he could overthink it. Hours passed, no reply. The next day, as he sat in the back of a rideshare heading to an investor dinner, he saw her name flash on his screen. "Meet me Sunday, the park, 3 o'clock, we'll talk then." Relief crashed into him like a wave. He replied simply, "I'll be there." Sunday arrived with a clear sky and a crispness to the air that signaled the changing season. Ethan arrived early, choosing a secluded bench near a grove of eucalyptus trees. He didn't bring the wheelchair, he didn't bring the persona. He brought only himself. Harper arrived on time wearing a soft red coat, her hair down, her face calm but unreadable. She sat beside him, close enough to speak quietly, but far enough to remind him that space still existed between them. "I got your message," she said. He nodded. "I wasn't sure if you would come." "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. "Then try to imagine it in your silence. But I've had time, and I'd rather hear the truth in your voice." He took a breath. "My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm not in a wheelchair, I never was. I run a tech firm here. I've been lying since the beginning." She didn't move. "I created the fake profile because I didn't want to be judged for my money or my status. I've had too many people pretend to care just to get close to what I have. I thought, maybe if I could remove all that, I'd find someone real." Harper listened, expression unreadable. "But then I met you," he continued. "And it stopped being about the test. It became about not knowing how to stop pretending without losing you." She looked away for a long moment, then back at him. "So, everything we shared was under a false name, a false identity. And you sat across from me pretending to understand something I've lived every day of my life with my brother. "Yes," he said, barely above a whisper. "And now?" "I've been offered a deal," he admitted. "A merger that would take me out of the country, Zurich, months away. And I realized I can't leave without making this right. I can't move forward carrying this." Harper stared at him. "Do you love me?" The question hit like a strike to the chest. He blinked once, the weight of it crashing into him with absolute clarity. "I think I do," he said, "and I think I started falling the day you didn't look at that chair like it meant less. But now I don't deserve to say it until I've earned your trust back." She nodded slowly. "Then start there." He exhaled. They sat in silence once more. But this time, it wasn't the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of beginning. Uncertain, fragile, but real. For the first time since they met, everything was out in the open. No more masks, no more tests, just the weight of truth and the faint, flickering hope of something honest in its wake. The days that followed their meeting in the park were suspended in a kind of quiet uncertainty. Ethan didn't press for more. He didn't call or text Harper beyond a simple message the next morning. "Thank you for listening." She replied only with, "I need some time." It was neither a goodbye nor a promise. It was a liminal space, and Ethan found himself hovering within it, trying not to fall backward into the ease of silence or forward into the urgency of repair. To the world outside, Ethan Caldwell remained the figure he had always been. Composed, focused, successful. Meetings resumed, press requests filtered through his team, and plans for the Zurich merger advanced with cautious optimism. But inside he was elsewhere. Every meeting felt thinner, every accomplishment less satisfying. He found himself watching moments pass as though he were not entirely in them. One evening, Harper walked into a small Italian restaurant near the Embarcadero, one she had discovered years ago and returned to often when she needed comfort food and quiet. She had no plans that night, no one to meet, just a need for pasta and solitude. The restaurant, dimly lit and tucked away beneath a series of stone arches, was half full. She was seated near the back, with a view of the bay through narrow windows. The table beside hers held a group of young professionals, 3 men and a woman, all in their late 20s, all dressed in a style that whispered ambition. Their voices were louder than necessary, and their conversation ebbed and flowed between business jargon and social gossip. Harper tried to ignore them, focusing on her wine, her book, her slow forkfuls of tagliatelle. But then she heard a name. "I mean, Ethan Caldwell's been off the radar since that last acquisition," one of the men said. "Some say he's prepping for another exit. Others say he's just burned out. Either way, dude's a ghost." Harper froze. Another voice chimed in. "You'd go ghost too if your net worth doubled overnight. I saw him once at a fundraiser in Napa. Total introvert. Looked like he couldn't wait to leave." Harper turned slightly, casually opening her phone. She typed the name into a search bar and scrolled through the images. There he was, Ethan Caldwell. Not the man in the chair, not the simple hoodie and quiet demeanor, but the polished, photographed version of the man she now realized she had come to know through a different lens. He looked exactly the same eyes, same smile, same jawline, but surrounded by headlines, interview quotes, gala photos. She tapped on one article, then another. They told stories of startups, of early investments, of a man who had mastered the art of staying just out of the spotlight's full glare. The timeline matched, the name matched, everything matched. And still her chest ached with the collision of memory and revelation, not because she didn't already know. She did. He had told her. But seeing it laid out, witnessing the full scope of who he really was through the impersonal filter of media and speculation, it changed something. She closed the browser and looked out at the bay. A slow, steady wind pushed across the water, rippling the lights and stretching reflections like ghosts. Harper sat there for a long time after finishing her meal, turning over every piece of the puzzle in her mind, not questioning his confession, but reassessing her response to it. Because now, something else had shifted. It wasn't just about the lie. It was about what came next. and what she would do with the knowledge she carried. 2 days later, she invited Ethan to join her at a local community garden where she volunteered on weekends. It was a simple text, without fanfare. Saturday morning, 10 o'clock. Meet me at the garden on 3rd and Juniper. Ethan replied almost immediately. I'll be there. When Saturday arrived, the air was bright with early light, the kind that softened the edges of the world. Ethan arrived in plain clothes, no disguise, no pretense. Harper was already there, kneeling beside a row of sprouting carrots, her hands covered in soil. She didn't look up when he approached, just gestured to the empty plot beside her. There's an extra pair of gloves on the bench, she said. Ethan put them on without a word and knelt beside her. For several minutes, they worked in silence, pulling weeds, loosening earth, adjusting the supports on tomato vines. It was the kind of quiet that allowed for thinking without pressure, for presence without explanation. Finally, Harper spoke. I saw some articles about you. Ethan nodded, not surprised. You're not just successful, you're part of a world I never belonged to. He looked at her. Neither do I, most days. I don't need your money, she said, and I don't care about your name, but I care about what kind of person hides behind those things, and more importantly, what kind of person steps out from behind them when it matters. I'm trying to be the second one now, and he said. She pulled a stubborn weed from the soil and tossed it into a pile. There's something else I need to say. He waited. When I heard your name in that restaurant, it didn't surprise me, but it did make me realize how much weight names carry. Yours is on buildings, on articles, on patents, and you hid it like it was something shameful. I wasn't ashamed of the name, Ethan said. Version of me I didn't recognize. I was ashamed of how often it made people see a Harper sat back on her heels, looking at the rows of green stretching out before them. You have a chance now to decide which version of you gets to lead, the one they wrote about or the one you've become. I want it to be this one, Ethan said quietly. She met his gaze. Then prove it, not to me, to yourself. They worked a while longer in silence, the sun rising higher, the garden filling with light. When they stood to leave, Harper removed her gloves and looked at him, her expression softer than it had been in weeks. You don't have to pretend anymore, she said. Here, what you do next will decide if I stay. You don't have to test me. I already chose to be. Ethan nodded. I understand, she smiled faintly. Good, because I don't plan on waiting forever. And with that, she walked down the garden path, the leaves brushing against her arms, the morning sun warming the world around her. Ethan stood in the dirt, hands still in gloves, heart still heavy but no longer hidden. For the first time in a long time, he felt like a man not escaping his name, but finally earning it. The next week unfolded with a tension that threaded through every decision Ethan made, as if the stakes of each moment now carried the weight of two lives, his and Harper's. He attended meetings, made calls, approved strategies, but beneath it all was the constant pull of a decision he knew could not be postponed much longer. Zurich loomed larger with each day, its possibilities vast and impersonal, a world that offered progress but demanded distance. And then there was Harper, whose every word, every gesture remained etched in his mind with a clarity that made his future feel fragile. He knew she had given him one last opening. Her voice in the garden, her gaze unshaken, had made it clear. She would not chase him. What came next would have to come from him. And so when Saturday arrived, Ethan made a decision. He messaged her. Picnic? I'll bring everything. Just meet me where we first talked. Harper responded with a single word. Okay. By noon the sun was high and unyielding, casting stark shadows across the park where their story had quietly begun. Ethan arrived first, setting down a blanket near the same bench they had sat on weeks. Fazio back when everything between them had been constructed on carefully chosen silences. Today there would be none of that. No disguises, no edits, just the truth, laid bare under an open sky. He brought a simple picnic, 2 sandwiches, iced, tea in a thermos, slices of fresh fruit, and waited. When Harper appeared, she wore a simple black dress and sandals, her hair pulled back, her face composed. She sat without a word, looking around the familiar setting, then at him. "You remembered the spot," she said softly. "Hard to forget," he replied. They ate quietly for a while, both aware of the words circling around them. Harper looked at the blanket, at the food, then finally at Ethan. "So," she said, "what did you want to talk about?" He exhaled slowly, setting his sandwich down. "I'm being asked to move forward with Zurich. A 6-month commitment, maybe more. Leadership, transition, oversight. It's a big deal." Her expression didn't shift. And I've been thinking about what that would mean, about what I'd be leaving behind if I said yes. Is this a goodbye conversation? "No," he said quickly. "Not unless you want it to be." Harper looked at him carefully. "Ethan, I've been patient. I've listened. I've tried to see who you really are beneath all of it. But I can't make this decision for you. If you're still running from your past or trying to shape your future into something that doesn't include honesty, I won't follow you into that." "I'm not running anymore," he said. "Doing is choosing what matters. I think I've done enough of that for a lifetime." The Zurich deal remained pending, but he asked his legal team to freeze discussions until further notice. There was no announcement, no formal withdrawal, just silence, a silence that matched the internal pause he had decided to take. For the first time in years, he gave himself permission to disconnect not just from work, but from the identity it had built around him. He spent his mornings walking the city's quieter streets, no longer hiding in plain sight, but simply observing. No chauffeur, no disguise, no staff hovering nearby. Just Ethan in comfortable clothes, learning what it meant to move through life without armor. In the evenings, he returned to an old notebook, one he had abandoned years ago, filled with ideas for projects that had nothing to do with profitability. Pages filled with sketches, notes on ethical design, thoughts about how technology could serve not commerce, but people. He read through them slowly, page by page, and realized how much of himself he had left behind in the rush to build what the world expected from a successful man. And in that rediscovery, Harper remained present. Not physically, not constantly, but in memory, in influence. She had become the mirror that reflected back not just his truth, but his potential. He knew he had broken something valuable when he lied to her. But what lingered now was not shame, it was resolve. The need to become the man who would no longer need lies to be seen. Harper, too, retreated into quiet. She continued her volunteer work at the community garden and resumed a short teaching workshop she had paused when her life had become too emotionally entangled. She met with friends, read in the late afternoons, and avoided social media entirely. She didn't talk about Ethan unless asked, and when she was, she simply said, "We're figuring it out." That was the only answer she was ready to give, and it was the only one she needed. But she thought of him often, of the way he had shown up at the gala not as an apology, but as a presence, of the steadiness in his voice when he admitted he wasn't running anymore, of the way he had listened without trying to repair everything in a single breath. She remembered the way he stood beside her quietly, as though knowing the only way forward was to remain still long enough to rebuild trust from the ground up. One Thursday evening, a letter arrived at Harper's door. Handwritten. No return. Address, just her name in the center of the envelope. The paper was thick, the handwriting precise, unmistakably Ethan's. She sat on her couch, unsealed the envelope, and unfolded the letter. It wasn't long. "Harper, I've spent these past weeks doing what I should have done from the beginning, sitting with my silence. Not because I have nothing to say, but because I wanted my words to come from reflection, not desperation. You've given me more than a second chance. You gave me the moment I didn't know I needed. The opportunity to be honest, not just with you, but with myself. I'm not asking for anything with this letter, not forgiveness, not a decision. I'm writing this because I owe you truth without request. I'm not going to Zurich. I've decided to take time away from the company, not to vanish, but to reconnect with the part of me that used to believe in building things for people, not just for profit. You reminded me of that. There's no chair beside me now, no hidden name, just space. And if you ever want to sit in it again, I will be grateful. But even if you don't, I'll carry what you taught me into everything that comes next. Thank you for seeing me, for challenging me, for being the first person in years to tell me no when I needed to hear it, and yes, when I didn't know I deserved it. Ethan Harper read the letter twice, then a third time. She didn't cry, she didn't smile. She simply sat with it, her fingers resting on the edges of the page, her breath steady. It wasn't the letter of a man begging. It was the letter of a man who had learned, and she knew the difference. That weekend, she visited her brother and cooked dinner at his apartment. They talked about the usual things, his latest freelance project, a new show he had started watching, the Foundation's next community event. Then, as they sat on the couch afterward, Nolan looked at her sideways. You still thinking about him? Harper didn't dodge. Yes. You going to see him again? She nodded slowly. I think so. Not because he wrote the letter. Because of who wrote it. Nolan studied her for a moment, then grinned. I like him more now. Me too, she said. The following morning, Harper took a walk to clear her mind. No destination, just motion. Her feet led her without thought, and soon she found herself passing the cafe where she and Ethan had first met. It hadn't changed. Same brick facade, same hanging sign that creaked slightly in the wind. She paused outside, then stepped in, and ordered her usual tea. As she turned to find a seat, her gaze drifted to the corner table, the one they had shared on that first afternoon, where she had smiled at a man in a wheelchair and greeted him like any other. It was empty now, but the memory of it pulsed in the quiet around her. She sat there alone for a while, sipping her tea, feeling the full weight of everything they had been through. Then she pulled out her phone and opened her messages. She typed just 3 words. Come meet me. And then she waited. Not with fear, not with hesitation, but with the calm of someone ready to see what came next. Not with illusions, not with conditions, but with both eyes open and her heart steady. Ethan arrived at the cafe before noon, a full 20 minutes after Harper had sent her message. He hadn't hesitated. He hadn't questioned it. He had simply dropped everything, walked out of his apartment, and made his way across the city with a heart that beat too loudly in his chest, but carried none of the fear it once had. His steps were unhurried, his breath steady, and when he saw the familiar brick front of the cafe come into view, he felt something deeper than anticipation. It was belonging. She was already inside, sitting at the same corner table where they had met weeks ago, a cup of tea in her hands and her posture relaxed. She didn't look up immediately. Instead, she finished whatever sentence she was writing in the small notebook, resting on the table. When she finally raised her head, their eyes met and the moment unfolded without fanfare. There were no dramatic gasps, no cinematic rush to embrace, just quiet understanding. Ethan approached the table slowly. May I? Harper nodded. Please. He sat across from her, folding his hands on the table. She closed her notebook and tucked it away, then looked at him with an expression that held no judgment, only clarity. Thanks for coming, she said. I would have come no matter where you asked me to. Harper smiled faintly. I know, that's why I asked. They sat for a moment without speaking. Outside the window, the world moved on. Cars passed, pedestrians wandered, sunlight shifted over the street. But inside the cafe, the two of them existed in a different rhythm, one forged by honesty and time. I read your letter again this morning, Harper said. Twice. Ethan didn't interrupt. It wasn't just a confession, she continued. It was a reflection. You weren't trying to get something back. You were offering something forward. That's what I hoped, he replied. She nodded, then leaned back slightly in her chair. You said something in the letter that stayed with me, about carrying what I taught you into everything that comes next. I meant it, Ethan said. I believe you, Harper said, simply. He exhaled, some tension uncoiling from his shoulders. I've spent my entire adult life trying to prove I belonged in rooms I didn't care to be in, trying to convince people I was worth something because of what I built. But you made me question that, gently, without trying. You were just yourself. And in doing that, you made me want to be mine. Harper reached for her tea, but didn't drink it. I didn't know what I was looking for when I agreed to that first blind date. I'd had too many quiet disappointments, too many people who didn't listen, didn't see. But you... She paused, her voice catching slightly before continuing. You were pretending. Yes, but even through that there was something true. I saw it in the way you didn't try to impress me, the way you asked questions, the way you listened. Ethan met her gaze. I was pretending not to be someone I thought no one could love. Harper softened, really are. But I think you were also trying to find out if someone could love who you may be, he admitted. I just didn't expect that someone to be you. They shared a quiet moment then, full of the strange, subtle ache that came from surviving, something delicate and emerging on the other side with the pieces still intact, slightly changed but not broken. Harper finally set her cup down and rested both hands on the table, palms open. So here's where I'm at, she said. I'm not looking for a perfect story. I'm not chasing a fantasy. I want a partnership, one where truth isn't something we arrive at after the damage is done, but something we start with. Ethan nodded. I want that too. I don't need grand gestures, she continued. I don't need promises about forever. I need today. I need this moment and the next one, and I need them to be real. What I am and what does, she asked. He leaned forward slightly, meeting her eyes. You do, and not just the idea of you, not just the comfort of being known. You exactly as you are. The woman who called me out when I lied. The woman who showed up when she didn't have to. The woman who looks people in the eye and makes them feel seen. Harper blinked once, then twice. Her hands were folded in her lap, still, but her breath had changed, quieter, deeper. I've spent years building things, he continued. Products, companies, reputations, but the only thing I've ever built that might actually be worth anything is whatever this is, between us. She studied him silently. I told Zurich I needed more time, he added, closing this chapter before it's finished. And I meant it, because I won't go if it means Harper tilted her head slightly. And if I said I wasn't ready to start a new one yet, then I'd wait, he said without hesitation. Things are worth being ready for. Not because I'm desperate, but because some. They sat there in the stillness of the moment, the hum of the park around them, children's laughter in the distance, a dog barking, leaves rustling under the breeze. Harper turned her face toward the sunlight for a moment, then looked back at him. There's one thing I still need to understand, she said. Chair about you. Not about your money, not about the ask. Why did you think you had to hide? Ethan took a long breath, thinking carefully before answering. Because I've spent so much time being rewarded for what I own, not who I am. And somewhere along the way, I started believing that who I am wasn't enough, that no one would look at me without looking past me, toward everything attached to my name. I thought the only way to be seen was to strip all of that away. But I went too far. I didn't just hide the noise, I hid myself, and I hurt you in the process. Harper nodded slowly, letting the weight of his words settle between them. I don't need you to be perfect, she said. I just need you to be real. I can do that, he replied, if you'll let me. A silence followed, not heavy or tense, but thick with emotion. Harper reached into the picnic basket and took the thermos, pouring iced tea into 2 small cups. She handed him one, without a word. They drank together quietly. No declarations, no fanfare, just the slow, shared sip of something honest. After a while, she set her cup down and looked at him again. There's a gala next weekend, a charity fundraiser. My brother's non-profit is one of the sponsors. I'll be there. He nodded. Do you want me to come? I want Ethan. Caldwell to come, she said. Tests, just are you. Not the version who hides, not the version who I'll be there, he said, his voice steady. Harper smiled, not wide, not triumphant, but full of something deeper. Forgiveness, maybe. Or simply peace. As they packed up the remains of the picnic, the sky above them shifted from midday blue to the faintest hue of afternoon gold. The air smelled like grass and sun-warmed earth, and for the first time since their story began, the space between them felt clear. No lies, no layers, only what remained now, truth and the possibility of more. The night of the gala arrived with all the precision and glamour expected from an event meant to impress and inspire. The venue, a restored historic hall downtown, had been transformed with soft lighting, towering floral arrangements, and subtle strings of music drifting from a live quartet near the entrance. Guests arrived in sleek black attire, each greeting, echoing the kind of social rhythm Ethan had learned to navigate years ago, but never truly enjoyed. He arrived alone, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, his name on the guest list without fanfare. He had not informed the organizers of his presence or requested special treatment. For once, he didn't want a spotlight. He wanted only one person to notice he was there, and to notice the version of him that no longer needed disguise. He scanned the crowd and eventually spotted Harper across the room. She stood in quiet conversation with two older women, her expression poised and attentive, her deep blue gown flowing like ink under the dim lights. She hadn't seen him yet, and for a few moments Ethan simply watched her. There was something grounding in her presence. She belonged in any room not because of appearance or acclaim, but because of the calm certainty she carried within her. When their eyes finally met, her gaze didn't widen in surprise nor narrow in scrutiny. She simply held it. A look that saw him, completely, clearly. She excused herself gently and walked toward him, with a pace that neither hurried nor hesitated. "You came," she said softly when they stood face to face. "I told you I would," he replied. Harper looked him over, not in appraisal but in confirmation. "No chair, no script. No mask," Ethan said. "Just me." She nodded once and offered a faint smile. "Come on, my brother wants to meet you." They walked through, the crowd side by side, neither touching nor avoiding it, just existing in a new rhythm, one shaped by truth instead of performance. Nolan Lawson stood near the bar, tall and lean, his wheelchair polished and adapted for mobility. He was laughing with a couple of friends, a drink in hand. Harper tapped his shoulder, and he turned, eyes lighting up when he saw her. "Nolan, this is Ethan," she said. Ethan extended his hand. "It's good to meet you." Nolan shook it firmly. "You too. Been hearing a lot about you lately." Ethan chuckled. "All good, I hope." "That depends on the version," Nolan replied with a smirk, "but I'll let you make your own case." The three of them talked for several minutes about the foundation, about Ethan's company, about adaptive design in software and devices. Nolan was sharp, engaged, and direct. There was no dance of pretense. When Harper stepped away briefly to greet another donor, Nolan leaned in slightly and said, "With that, she doesn't trust easy, but when she does, she's all in." "Don't mess." Ethan nodded. "I know, I already did. I'm trying to earn it back." Nolan studied him for a moment, then relaxed. "Fair enough." Later in the evening, speeches began. Harper took the stage as one of the board members of the foundation, speaking about accessibility, opportunity, and the power of authentic inclusion. Her voice carried easily, not rehearsed, but resolute. Ethan watched her from their table, feeling something stir in his chest, a blend of admiration and the quiet burn of knowing just how close he had come to never knowing her at all. When she finished, applause filled the room. As she returned to her seat beside him, she gave him a glance that wasn't meant for acknowledgement. It was meant for alignment. A quiet question. "Are you still here?" He answered with his presence, with the fact that he hadn't once thought about leaving. As the night wound down, Harper and Ethan stepped out onto the venue's balcony. The city stretched below, glittering in the distance. Harper leaned against the stone railing, arms crossed lightly. "You surprised me tonight," she said. "Good surprise or dangerous one?" "Good," she replied, "but not in the way you think. I expected you to show up, but I thought you'd try to fix everything at once, make some grand gesture, push for an answer." "And I didn't," he said. "No, you just showed up as yourself, and that matters more than anything else would have." He nodded slowly. "I didn't want to steal the moment. This wasn't about me." She turned toward him. "And that's why I think we might actually have a chance." There was a beat of silence between them. Not hesitation, just recognition. "I'm not saying this is a perfect reset," she said, "but I see the effort. I see the truth now. And I think that's a beginning." Ethan stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that their shared warmth pushed back against the night chill. "I don't want perfect," he said. "I just want real." Her breath came out slowly, steady. Just two people trying to see what's possible. "Then let's take our time. No more tests, no more games." He nodded. "That's more than enough for me." For a long time, they stood there in the quiet of the city's hum, two people who had crossed lies and truths, hurt and healing, masks and revelations. And now, they were finally beginning. Not at the start of a romance, but at the start of honesty. When they rejoined the party, Harper slipped her hand into his, not for show, not for approval, but as a quiet acknowledgement. He didn't grip tightly. He didn't lead. They walked side by side. And for the first time since it all began, Ethan felt like a man moving not ahead or behind, but beside, where he had always wanted to be. After the gala, the pace of their interactions shifted, not backward into the hesitation that had marked the early weeks of their relationship, but forward into something more deliberate and grounded. They no longer texted every day, no longer scheduled dates as distractions or escapes. Instead, there was space between their meetings, and within that space, both Ethan and Harper began to confront what their connection meant without the noise of pretense or urgency. Ethan retreated into solitude, not as avoidance but as necessity. He stopped going into the office, instead working remotely from his apartment, turning down press requests and declining interviews. "You have them," he said, "all of them." She smiled, this time fully. It wasn't a smile of relief or triumph. It was the kind of smile that belonged to someone who had walked through uncertainty and come out with something whole. They left the cafe together, not holding hands, not rushing into declarations, but walking side by side. It was a warm afternoon, the kind that asked nothing of the day except presence. They walked through the neighborhood, past bookstores, past flower stands, past people living their lives in quiet chaos and joy. At one point, Harper stopped at a corner where a musician played a slow, steady tune on an old guitar. She listened for a moment, then looked at Ethan. "What would you have done," she asked, "if I hadn't responded to your letter?" "I would have kept growing anyway," he said. "But I would have missed you every day." She nodded, as if that answer had already been written in the spaces between them. Eventually, they found themselves back at the park, the same bench, now half shaded by late afternoon trees. They sat together, shoulders close but not touching. The sounds of the city faded beneath the rustle of leaves and distant laughter. "I don't know what this becomes," Harper said, "but I know I want to find out." "So do I," Ethan replied. He looked at her then, not the way he had during their first meetings, full of fear and calculation, but openly, with the softness of someone who had learned that love wasn't something to trap or test, but something to trust. She reached for his hand and took it gently. No performance, no illusion. Just two people beginning, not again, but truly, for the first time.